Yes, thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to be here with us. We're very excited to be here. This is our second year at devcom, and last year, the idea of this speech actually started from attending a very similar one by Roslana and Charlie on cultural heritage and representation in games, and we believe it's a very important topic. It's something that we, as the game industry, should really focus on, should have this conversation any chance we get, and should continue talking about this because it is something that is not talked about enough in our industry, and we do believe it's worth the attention because it covers more than just one particular point about entertainment and games, but also it has to do with human and people and cultures. And this is what we're going to talk about today. So my name is Haron. I'm an art director and concept artist, and my good friend and colleague Nabaz, he's the creative director of our studio, and I don't know if you can tell, but Nabaz is very comfortable speaking publicly. uh, but yeah, this is something we're very passionate about. So we know that you guys are as well because you're here. So let's have a conversation. Let's talk about games as more than just entertainment. So yeah, to start, have a context and why we're talking about this, I need to tell you a little bit about who we are, where we come from. So we are from Kevir Entertainment, which is a game development and outsourcing company. And this is a very exciting time for us because after 2 years of development and founding of our studio, we are finally revealing our game. In 2 days, it will be revealed officially with IGN. And we also have a booth downstairs at the Indie exhibition where you can come and see the game and test it for yourself. So yeah, we are very excited to finally be sharing it with the world. But at the same time, we at Kevir Entertainment are really, really passionate about cultural heritage and its preservation in games. And there's a good reason for that. It does not come from a vacuum. And yes, we are from a place called Kurdistan. By show of hand, how many people do know where that is? Yeah, okay, that's good, but most of you don't, which is why it's important to talk about this. So Kurdistan is a beautiful land of nature. We are very proud of our mountains. We think of them as our spiritual allies and our connection to the nature. And it has a very diverse biology, animal life, plants and different types of geographies and geology in general. But at the same time, it's a historically significant region. As part of ancient Mesopotamia, Kurdistan is home to more than 7,000 years of history. There's been many, many civilizations that went through these lands, many different cultures, a very rich literature, and at the same time, we, especially as Kurds, have a very rich oral tradition. We have many stories, many folk songs, great music, great dances, beautiful art. And this, by the way, is a town called Amedi, which is a 6,000 years old human settlement. And by the way, these photos are taken by my good friend Diyar Shahbaz, and we thank him very much for providing them. They're beautiful. And at the same time, Kurdistan is a growing economy. It's becoming more and more developed, and more industries are entering. But despite all these things, despite where we come from and all this heritage that we have, growing up as fans of games, people who love games, we always lacked seeing ourselves in films or games or seeing our region or country represented, right? And this gave us the question of why is that, right? Because many cultures are represented. Some of them are represented more than others. And the reason why we had that question is because to us personally, as gamers, as consumers, we grew up loving games. We played many games, and a lot of times these games were our gateways to historical settings, to other cultures. It inspired us to learn more about other people, other settings, other time periods. For example, this is the God of War franchise for me personally was a huge inspiration for me to just learn about Greek mythology. And it opened many doors. So by jumping into mythology, then I learned about storytelling. I learned about the monomyth and how the hero's journey works and how it applies to today's stories and films like the Star Wars or Matrix, right? So this has all started from this ripple effect that the game had on me, right? And on the right side is one of my favorite franchises of all time, which was Assassin's Creed. And yeah, particularly Assassin's Creed 2 was the setting was Florence in Italy. And it really, really inspired me to just learn more about the Renaissance era, the philosophies, the art, the architecture. The landmarks are beautifully represented in the game. And we'll come back to what Assassin's Creed actually contributed more in a more concrete sense in the game industry. And yeah, so this is the questions of if games have so much influence on people to learn more about cultures and history and heritage, how come there is not enough of it or we are not part of it, right? So by when I say us is because we come from a underrepresented culture, but there's many people in my shoes. For example, Narina is from Armenia, and she also doesn't see herself much in games, right? So that is why Nabaz is going to tell you a little bit about the game industry and how even though these games are heavily fictionalized, they still have real impact. They still spark this curiosity and interest for us to sit down and think about something. It leads you into something else. It's like a rabbit hole that leads you inside of it. Yeah.
So video game industry is like rapidly growing. Like from film to music industry combined, is still not as big as video games. So it is important to understand, okay, the impact from video games on people and the reaction from like interacting with the game usually takes people deeper to the stories and understanding through the gameplay rather than movies. So about growing for video games, so there's a new market happening for indie games that is very different to AAA games. For AAA games, usually they use the same formula that is already established, the historically and the story of it. So for indie, they take more risks and it's more innovative. So in that sense, we have a bigger chance for video games in indie era. And I think that's the future of video games. Like the indie will be the mainstream and AAA will be kind of like occasional, yeah.
No, yeah, most certainly, because and we know this because we have an indie company and we understand the idea that for us it's a much smaller risk to take when we tell a unique story, right? But yeah, as Nabaz said, for an established company with expectations like millions of players waiting for them, they cannot try something new so easily. It has to be really something that they know that can sell well, and that prevents them, understandably, from jumping into other uncharted territories, if you might call them that. Yes, so some case studies on how games affected real life advancement of us understanding heritage or preserving it. So, for example, this is Assassin's Creed Unity from Ubisoft, 2014. And a little bit of context, in 2019, the Notre Dame of Paris Cathedral was under fire. It damaged a lot of its structure. It damaged a lot of the treasures that were inside. And it was very unfortunate for the heritage of the world. It was something, it sparked a conversation on how do we prevent this from happening? How do we help reconstructing this? How do we contribute to preserving these important landmarks that is, at the end of the day, we live on Earth and things are prone to damage, to loss, and we'll talk about it a bit more later on. But Unity, just for context, took place in Paris. I believe that just prior to the French Revolution. So they had, as Ubisoft, they had researched the Notre Dame very thoroughly. They made a very, very intricate model of the church, interior, the structure, the architecture, the point and everything that goes with it. So when that disaster happened, Ubisoft offered the French government a model of Notre Dame de Paris from the game, and the French government was able to successfully utilize that to their efforts in reconstructing the church. So this just tells us how attention to detail and how the commitment of Ubisoft to depicting this landmark accurately helped preserve it not only in our imagination and entertainment, but also in real life. So it's just a small example of how that can be implemented or can be put into real life.
for The Witcher, so my history with The Witcher, when I played The Witcher, I had no history of Poland. Didn't understand the background, the history, the culture, or anything. So for me to be introduced to Polish culture through The Witcher was a big deal for me. So through the game, even though the game is fantasy, but still the game used a lot of folk stories and manipulated and for the video game to be fun, and also using the music from Polish culture, the texture, the patterns, the clothes, and the architecture. And so through the game, it opened the door for me to Polish culture, and then I went to Polish cinema and so on. So for a video game to have this impact for the Polish culture and to introduce it to the global market, just like I'm interested in Japanese culture, I'm also interested in Polish culture. So I think for us human, we are fascinated by different cultures to see from different perspectives and to be introduced to them. So this game, not only for global market, did a huge impact, but also for Polish industry. It literally started the Polish industry for video games. Like from that point, I met a lot of artists and a lot of musicians that were like came from this game. Yeah.
Yeah, so of course the impact is beyond just preserving culture. It also, you know, as Nabaz said, can contribute to establishing an industry. And yeah, this definitely happens. So we actually just yesterday we met people also today from Poland who came into the industry because of this game, because CD Projekt and this game opened doors for money to come in, for an economy to thrive on games, and then from there, of course, it's just a ripple effect, and it just grows bigger and bigger. Yeah, just another example is this game called Ghost of Tsushima. So it's by Sucker Punch, and this actually is a bit of a different example because Ghost of Tsushima explores medieval Japan, right? But it does not come from Japan. It comes from another company, right? So this is an example of a game that was extremely well received by the Japanese audience and critics, and it was commended for their efforts in really depicting the Japanese culture faithfully. So this is another topic that we'll come back to, but how do you do that, right? So we will definitely talk about this more, but Sucker Punch had great connections, and they brought on specialists from Japan. They brought up people who work in museums on heritage, historians, to make sure that their representation of their culture is faithful. Because if you're going to use somebody else's culture to tell a story or to make a video game, then you gotta have put effort into doing it right. That is very important because at the end of the day, this is representing a group of people. It doesn't come from space, right? So it is an important responsibility that we'll definitely talk about a bit more. But yeah, so not only they paid homage and respect to Japanese culture, you can tell that these guys really love what they're doing because in the game there is a mode called the Kurosawa mode. So when you finish the game, you can play the game through the lens of Akira Kurosawa, the legendary Japanese filmmaker. So they basically have a filter that drops on the game where it changes the setting to look more like his films, the way he shot films. So not just history, but even their cinema. It just shows them that this is a love letter from us to Japan. And that is where, you know, if somebody from Japan would say, okay, this maybe I'm okay with this. This does represent me, right? So another really cool example, this shrine in the game, which is called the Watatsumi Shrine, the game takes place on the Tsushima island of Japan, and that temple is real. It exists. And a few years ago, sadly, it was hit by a typhoon, and the typhoon damaged the structure quite heavily. So the people there, because it's not a very big temple, so they actually started a fundraising, like a GoFundMe campaign, to reconstruct the temple. And the monk who was responsible for it was not expecting a lot of, support. And then suddenly they raised $260,000. And then later, the monk spoke to media about it. Said, I then discovered that most of the people who contributed were fans of Ghost of Tsushima. So another example of how a game can contribute to real-life preservation of heritage, because even introduction of heritage can lead to interest, can lead to empathy, can lead to our desire to preserve better, because now we're part of it. Now I know this temple. So when something happens, I feel like, you know, I'm responsible somehow. I should be able to contribute. Yeah, we'll tell you just a little bit about what we do because yes, we have a game. It's called Operation Stutter, and it's a psychological horror game. But at the same time, because of where we come from and because of our passion for this particular subject matter, we do a lot of other projects. Some of them are internal projects. Some of them are in collaborations with other institutions that do exactly this. Is our effort and our social responsibility to contribute to preserving heritage. So Nabaz will tell you a bit about Grandpa's Eyrie, which is one of our projects.
Yeah. So Grandpa's Eyrie was developed as an experience for VR. It's a small project. We polished it locally, and it had a huge local impact, like positive impact. So the experience is for an old lifestyle in old Kurdish house. So new kids from cities do not understand this lifestyle, and this experience was almost cathartic. So it had no story or anything to it. To just stay in it in VR, and you can play some music from radio and just interact with the objects and what's the purpose of these objects and so on. So it's an experience and more like education, but at the same time, people had a huge positive reaction to it, at least for the vibe of it, like the vibe that impressed them.
Of the game, or just showcasing it. I don't know how this plays. Just press next to it. Yeah, there you go. Yes, and now I'm going to talk to you about something that is very dear to my heart. This is my book. It's called Mythical Beings of Mesopotamia, which is an illustrated book that takes 12 mythical creatures from ancient Mesopotamia and also the more recent folklores of our region. So Kurdish folklore, Arabic folklore, Syriac, like Christian folklore of our region, and introduces them in a book. Why a book? Because to make a game like The Witcher, you need a lot of money, you need a lot of people. So we as an indie studio, what can we do that is possible within our realm, right? So if you cannot make a game, you can still make a book. You can make other mediums. So that is why our studio is called Kevir Entertainment and not Kevir Games, because even though we are mainly doing games, but we do believe that other entertainment products can be as impactful, if not more sometimes, right? So throughout this game, this book, you will learn about these creatures, but at the same time, there's visual representations. And this almost like a preparation for like a future game, because we do have game projects that do take place in these settings, and we will need to recreate these creatures, these stories. So for now, you know, a book is there, you know, people can read about this, they can learn about them. And something that is very important for us, because, you know, growing up, again, just back to this point, for example, we in Kurdish culture, oral traditions are very important. So my grandmother was telling me stories of these creatures, right? So I had imagination, I had like ideas of these creatures, but I never saw them visually because they're not in games, they're not in movies. And it was really important for me to say, okay, we don't have these yet, and you know, games are expensive. How can I introduce a lot of these creatures to the younger generations? Because, for example, my grandma, they grew up in a time where oral traditions were very much alive. These stories come from hundreds of years ago, and they're passed down generation to generation. But sadly, they're dying down with everything else. With globalization, people are less and less interested in oral traditions. So, for example, my generation, our generation, we don't know much about this. And the one that came after us, they don't know anything at all. So one way for us to communicate these stories, to make them cool as well, because, you know, to perceive something as interesting, they have to be cool. And for us who grew up with games and movies are cool. So that is why we do it in a style that is very relevant to our industry, a style that can resonate with the younger audiences that can say, oh, wow, we also have cool creatures. So, yeah, I love the creatures from Ragnarok and The Witcher, but look at this. We also have creepy creatures that can scare the hell out of us, right? So, but yeah, some of them, some of these creatures are, of course, like demons and evil ones, but some of them are really interesting and calm. Like we have, for example, Lamasu is an Assyrian creature that was entrusted with guarding the royal palaces of Assyria. Pirhavir is actually a creature. The reason I put her there is because my grandmother used to tell me stories of her. I didn't sleep for nights. I don't know why she did that, but it did open my imagination. So I guess that was a positive outcome of that. So yeah, that's partly thanks to her. Yeah, the next thing, again, beyond entertainment and beyond games, we are working with other institutions, museums, other companies that are thinking about the same thing that we are thinking about, right? So we don't have a lot of even something like a toy industry, right? So we were approached by a client who was really interested in, again, how we are making a game industry back home. They are interested in making a toy industry back home, right? So they were like, okay, we have a lot of cool characters, a lot of cool personalities. Can you make a toy out of them? I was like, yeah, hell yeah, let's do that. So yeah, we started developing this product. It's Piramir is a Kurdish poet. He's a very cool guy. I highly recommend you go and check him out. And so we were thinking about, okay, how do we turn this basically like a cultural icon and we bring it into pop culture? So, you know, we are basically right now, basically the pre-production is done. We are thinking about manufacturing and we will 3D print the prototype. And so this is very exciting for us, just engaging with other people who are thinking similarly. It's just to keep the ball rolling and, you know, yeah, so I cannot wait to show you this guy. Maybe next year we are here. We'll have a prototype with us. Yeah, Nabaz.
So along with that, we did this exhibition in Duhok, so for cultural exhibition, and this was one of the projects that we turned from 3D printing to like an installation, and it represents the Kurdish housing and the Kurdish houses that are related to mountains, and sometimes they are built with the steep of the mountain. So to manipulate that idea and make it more playable, and to get ideas from it, and the web that comes from the connections from these houses, they are almost like a one house in it all. So because they are connected, the walls are connected, sometimes the rooms are connected, the doors are connected. So the stories and talks always walk around the houses. They are always connected. So that was the idea. And also with this one, we did other projects for the paintings and some of the creatures we added to for the culture and the history of the region.
These are really, really interesting. So there are two towns that I recommend you maybe Google them after this. One of them is called Hauraman, and the other one is called Akre. Akre is Akre. The really interesting thing about them is, again, going back to the idea of mountains, these houses are, as Nabaz said, they're on the slope of the mountain. So sometimes the roof of one of them becomes the yard of the second one. So they're all interlocked, and then at the end, it does look like like one structure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Opportunities and responsibilities. What can we do to basically further this topic? What can we do to add to the idea of preserving heritage? We'll talk about a couple opportunities, but we also talk about responsibilities because it is a sensitive topic. Yes, so when we think about preserving heritage through games, we don't think strictly about video games. We think about, okay, how can the technology used in games also be used to preserve heritage? Because at the end of the day, they're both, you know, we're thinking about digitalization. So games are a digital medium. And for example, this is a company, it's called SciArc, it's an American company. And over the past few years, they have basically archived more than 200 sites across all the 7 continents. And now they have a digital version of them all. And this is extremely important because should a disaster happen, we have a digital archive. And a photogrammetry or a scan is not like, you know, numbers and sketches on a paper. This is far more accurate, is far more practical if you want to recreate it. And I personally became like introduced to photogrammetry and scanning in 2014 and 15, because that was a time where something really unfortunate happened. So the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq and on the borders of Kurdistan started destroying cultural heritage, UNESCO sites. This was a huge blow to just human heritage in general. And that was the time where this conversation started becoming more and more serious. I remember, like at the university I was studying at the time, I wrote a paper on how this can be something that, as a precaution to actually have like preserve data, because not only wars can damage them, but as we learned before, typhoons, tsunamis, earthquakes, heritage is always prone to damage. So we should be always looking for other ways to see, okay, how can we contribute. So scanning is definitely one of them. Yes, collaboration with museums and other heritage organizations. This is something we're very interested in. We're always trying to see. So right now in Kurdistan and also Iraq and neighboring countries, there are a lot of efforts in basically conservation, reconstructions. Some of them are led by European missions, some of them by American, other like Asian ones. So universities are coming, they're collaborating with our heritage institutions to rebuild and construct. And we're always looking, talking to them and offering our help. How can we help you guys? How can we help you using our technology and skills to move this from just academic stuff to also something a bit more digitalized? Because as Nabaz, I believe, has something to say about how scanning needs post-processing, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So as Kevir, how can we like elevate and contribute to the scanning and all that? So most of the times in this archaeology, like the scanning is being done by archaeologists, so they don't know how to polish it, how to make it better. So it's barely usable for today, let alone for future. So for us at Kevir, because we are working for video game industry, we know how to make it interactable. We know how to clean the objects and how to texture them and to be as realistic as possible and as detailed as possible. That's one of the reasons that France used from Ubisoft rather than an archaeology scanning. So for us, it's really important for the next level, not just scanning, but to clean up the scanning and to make it interactable, especially also for museums and for these activities.
Just because from the technical side of things, a scan is basically useless when it comes to interactivity. So it has to be processed. For example, if we have all the 200, for example, 200 sites from SciArc, if they're sitting in an archive, why not make them a VR project? Why not make them something that the player can actually sit in that place and look around and interact? So this is where we as the game industry can contribute significantly. So other technologies, VR is a great one, because the project that we made is basically aimed at that. So Grandpa's areas, how can you make an interactive museum, right? So something that people can enjoy, but at the same time learn something. So contributing to basically working with museums. Other technologies, so for example, motion capture or like scanning, they're being used right now with more and more museums. So every museum, they're learning about this and they understand the value of immersive experiences and how they are far more impactful in impacting us on a cognitive level. At the same time, it creates interest, and I think interest is really, really important, because if I'm interested, I'm going to do my own research, right? So that's very important. How do you get people in? That's the most difficult part, is get them interested. They know what to do later, right? That last picture actually is from 2 days ago. It's from Cologne. And so we had this presentation ready, and we're walking near the Cologne Cathedral, and then we see a bunch of people just standing there and having VR headsets. And then I looked around, and it's a museum, and this is an exhibition called Our in Motion exhibition. I was like, yeah, that goes in our exhibition. We gotta talk about this, right? So it's great to see, because more and more institutions are implementing that. They're understanding the value of interactive mediums, right? Yeah, okay. This is the bit more difficult side of things. I remember that from your speech also, Ruslan. We talk about Willy from The Simpsons. This is a bit of a tricky one, because, and also we can only talk about this from our own point of view as as Kurdish people, right? We cannot speak for anybody else. And sadly, we are not really represented much in games. And when we are, it's not always accurate or doesn't really do justice. We grew up with Call of Duty. We love Call of Duty games. I enjoyed the Modern Warfare series, and I played the Modern Warfare 2 probably tens of times. So in 2019, when they announced Modern Warfare, the reboot version, it was apparent from the trailer that one of the leading characters is a Kurdish woman, a Kurdish fighter. Again, a little bit of context. So we briefly talk about the war that was forced upon us in 2014. On the borders of Kurdistan, men and women took arms to defend their homes and their land. And on the right side, on the left side, these are Kurdish women fighters. And you can see the similarities that, okay, this character is 100% inspired by them. Sadly, when the game came out, this character is not Kurdish, even though she looks Kurdish, even though she's wearing our attire, but it's from a fictional country. And their names are Kurdish. They wear Kurdish clothing. They are representing the visual side, the cool factor of these women who are fighting, but not their revolution, not their message. And this is something a bit unfortunate, because I don't know how much of this is just from lack of awareness and how much of it is deliberate, because this is really important, right? This is a real impact that these people went through. They didn't wear these clothing just for fun or for fashion. These are pragmatic clothing that they needed to wear. So when they're presented, when they're on screen, then at least give credit to our struggle, because it's not been easy and we're fighting for survival. And yeah, so that was a bit unfortunate. So we really are hoping that things do change moving forward. It's always helpful to bring people on board. So if you're representing a culture, bring them on board, talk to them, see if they like what you have, and see if they see themselves in it. It's really important. And a different example is this any Metal Gear fans here? There you go. That's yep. Hi guys. Yeah. So this is a game that came out in 1998. Metal Gear Solid by the legendary Hideo Kojima. Another context. I know that some of these things are really like negative and sad, but this is our reality, right? So in 1992. The Kurdish population of Iraq was facing annihilation again. There was a genocidal campaign against my people, my parents, his parents. We were all part of it. It was imposed by the Ba'athist regime, Saddam Hussein. So it was a genocidal campaign. More than 100,000 Kurdish people lives were lost in the struggle. And many people fought. Many people fought back, and they fought hard. And in 1998, so think about it, in 1992, there is no internet available. Nobody knows about what's happening in Kurdistan. Nobody knows what we're going through except for some select media outlets who can talk about the story. So it's not like today. Today, when the struggle happens, thankfully, there is a lot more coverage. We can talk about it, right? But not back then. So somebody like Hideo Kojima said, this people's struggle deserves to be mentioned. So in this game, he dedicated this character called Sniper Wolf, and she's a Kurdish fighter, even though the game is action, so a sci-fi action, and what she's wearing and how she doesn't look at all Kurdish, but we still feel this represents us because it's done with respect. It's done with the idea of paying homage and credit to a culture. So all these things matter. The intent is really, really important, right? And in the game, even though you fight against her, he gave her a little speech at the end to introduce the Kurds and our struggle. This is a little clip from the game.
I am a Kurd. I have always dreamed of a peaceful place like this.
A Kurd? So that's why you're called Wolf?
I was born on the battlefield. Raised on the battlefield. Gunfire, sirens, and screams. They were my lullabies. Hunted like dogs, day after day. Driven from our ragged shelters. That was my life. Each morning I'd wake up and find a few more of my family or friends dead beside me. I stare at the morning sun and pray to make it through the day. The governments of the world turned a blind eye to our misery. But then, he appeared.
Sorry, you cannot hear me? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so in a time where really nobody knew about what was going on, we had somebody who said, these people need to be mentioned in my game, and he gave us a character that introduced the Kurds to many people who did not know who they were in a time where we really needed the recognition, right? So games are not just entertainment. They're cultural memory, and we all have the power to decide what gets remembered. And I'd like to take this opportunity to just have a conversation, because I believe this is very important, and just go around the room and talk about maybe an instance or a point where we really thought, okay, this game introduced me to this, or I learned from this culture, from this game, and also what we can do. So because we are all apparently, we are here, which means we are interested in the subject. So what can we exchange in terms of ideas? Anybody who has a memory of this game introduced me to this thing? Let's take a moment to think about it.
Hey guys, thanks a lot for your presentation. I mean, I'm Persian, so for me, of course, it is the Prince of Persia games. So I was always interested in. I also heard the stories of Ahura Mazda and Ahriman from the Zoroastrian culture and religion, which we don't have anymore. I mean, there are probably 1,000 Zoroastrians in Iran nowadays, and they're most of the time in India, in Hindustan. And so it was very fascinating for me to see in a video game, in the Prince of Persia game 2008, to listen about Ahriman and is this the evil god and so on, and seeing the relation between the Persian Zoroastrian mythology and the Greek mythology. I mean, they're very close to each other before the Islamic culture or the monotheist religion. So that's the moment where I just said, okay, why there's not more games like that about the Middle Eastern cultures? I mean, I'm studying history and I'm always reading that our cultures were there 10,000 years ago, at the same time like the Egypts, but in the Western countries, I don't know, they just see, okay, they see Kurdistan and say, okay, this is probably a map from Call of Duty or something else. And so that's what they see from our cultures. So yeah, that's the waking moment for me. So I'm thankful. And I have also a question to you guys probably. Don't you think that there is a bigger responsibility for the big studios? Like, for example, I'm very thankful that Ubisoft is doing the Prince of Persia games and making a game for a brighter audience in the Western culture. And don't you think that it would be more nice to see, I mean, Sony just made Ghost of Tsushima. Wouldn't it be nice to see more games from the big studio companies that they are making games about different cultures? I mean, why there's no game about African culture, for example? I'm always interested in the African culture, but there's nothing that I could tell you from the AAA game or AAA market that they would represent African culture, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. But for the question, I would just briefly we talked about it, but first of all, it's something we as individuals don't have control on, but we do have control on our own, stories and our studios. So that is why, as indies, we believe now we have the stage. We can initiate that, but hopefully more and more bigger studios are also doing that. And something else that is very important is we are having this conversation. So this is devcom. Gamescom is the largest game event in the world, and you're able to have this conversation. So this is a starting point. Our voices will be heard, and our concerns will be heard. And at the end of the day, I believe we are moving forward in a positive direction. Do you have anything to add, Nabaz?
Yeah, so the risk for AAA games is like it's hard for them to spend hundreds of millions of dollars for a new idea, new culture. So they just refurbish the same idea, the same standard formula, and using the same history that is already been established in public, let's say from Greek and Chinese or so on. So for them it's hard. So that's when, for me, the indie industry is doing the best when taking the risks and doing innovations. And I think from that point, when a game does really good, then a AAA can take advantage of that and then exaggerate the whole idea to a next level. But it's hard for them when it's not been introduced at all for producers to spend that amount of money on it. So, yeah.
So we can pave the way. I think that's
Hi. I just wanted to address your comment in terms of a game that's inspired by Africa. Tales of Kinzera Zao was released by Silver Rain Studios, and that was published by EA. And the founder is Abu Bakr Salim, who was actually in Assassin's Creed as, it was the Egyptian one. What was the main character's name in the Egyptian one? Bayak. Yeah, thank you. So he voiced him, but he's also got his own studio. So there's, again, things coming out. I do have a question. So I consult in this area on specifically games that introduce Black characters or characters from African backgrounds, which I found that very interesting as well. So I'm really grateful for what he said. But I would also be remiss if we didn't kind of address the elephant in the room about gaming audiences and how they react to characters of different races and backgrounds. With games like yours coming out, how are you preparing for that? Because it happened, and I would love to know how you're going to kind of protect yourselves or kind of create an inviting environment for gamers who tend to not want to see other people.
Yeah, that's a very difficult one, and also is quite complicated because this comes from years, decades of misrepresentation or selective representation. And I believe the only way forward is for us to change that. It's just to have more voices from places that are not previously heard. So the first thing you do is you familiarize yourself. Like, yeah, okay, now I hear more people. I hear people from Kurdistan, from Iran, from Africa, right? So this is a step. This is the first step. And the second one is we do live in the age of social media and communications, which allows us to directly talk to our audiences. So that is why we believe these community buildings and just having conversations about this are very important. So if you see our brochures or our website, there is, we always have something dedicated to cultural heritage representation, right? Because it's our responsibility. Yeah, we cannot escape it. And it's for us to really try and change that by taking baby steps, but in the right direction, right? At the end of the day, we're all here. We come from all around the world, and we are having this conversation, which means that things are changing. Because last year we had 2 or 3 speeches on cultural heritage, and this year we have also a couple. And so the conversation is continuing, and just by talking about it, finally, at the end of the day, we're going to be heard, and things are going to change. We're very positive. Actually, we are really optimistic about where this is going, because now the world is more aware. People are more connected than they were 10 years ago. So you cannot get away with these like stereotypical representation of cultures so easily, because now we have a voice. We can say, "What are you doing?" That's not who I am. So hopefully we are moving forward. Yeah. Any other experiences, questions? Please.
I think rather a thought than a question, but what you said about representation and that there is a pushback or like sometimes backlash when you see some categories of people being represented. And I think partially that is because people are not being portrayed as people first, but rather being a representative or having this specific trait. And it's hard to see them as actual person because you see them as a caricature of what they're supposed to be. And I think when you see person as a person, you see a person instead of somebody who's representing whatever the check mark they have to go for. Like, for example, in Alien, at the very end, like a woman survives it. Sorry for spoilers. The woman survives the film, right? At the end. Sorry.
Ripley.
And you don't really see her as, oh, it's a strong, independent woman. You see a human fighting and going through this journey. And that's how I always like saw her. And I think that's like a fantastic way to represent somebody. Focus on what they do, what kind of person they are. And then you have all of these other check marks. They're interesting to explore.
I couldn't agree more, because I think it's really, I don't know if they know it, like the people who make films and games that are not really representing well, but it shows. It's so obvious. Like you can read through, it's like, that's they didn't talk to a black person with this character. You can tell, right? And people feel that. Even if they don't know it, they feel it. So yeah, that's a great example, because if your goal is to really like represent a strong, independent woman, then just make a human. Make a person that really have fears and emotions and yeah, so there definitely is. So it's a great point. I think we ought to be more careful. And yeah, audiences are way smarter than they think. They really think that, as things pass by, everybody notices. And if you go on Reddit or other forums, people are talking about it. They notice it. It's not a time where people haven't seen other people. Everybody knows each other.
So in that sense, so it is something that we really cannot control and we cannot do anything. So even big companies suffer from that. I think people smell the on authenticity. I think for us as developers, authenticity matters, and for the artist, the obligation to ask but not to tell the truth. So just to ask the right question for the artist and to be authentic is the right way.
Any other comments, contributions, please?
You asked earlier about games that inspired or kind of exposed more of like other cultures to me. One recently for me was Children of Morta by Dead Mage, which an Iranian studio based out of Austin. But they, we played me and my wife and I played that game at a time where we were having our own family, and it's a game about a family. And the fascinating thing about it, like all of the design and the set and the graphics and the writing is very clearly inspired by their culture, but it's not explicitly called out as Iranian or Arabic or anything. But it's just so unique and just a fantastic game to play through. And just I hadn't seen anything like it before.
So we are really excited because now a lot of studios can get away with making games with very small budget, and even publishing is right now better for independent studios. So Steam, for example, allows you to just publish a game without any publisher. So yeah, we are seeing more and more examples of really unique cultures and succeeding. So that's the important thing, because if people are resonating with it, if they enjoy it, it means that, okay, we are doing something right. We are taking the right steps.
I'm sorry I came in late. I had a conflict in
You're
calendar.
welcome anyways.
Yeah, so my name is David. I'm a game developer from Nigeria. Yes, working on a game based on the Nigerian culture. So I really wanted to be in this session. It's more like a question. If you're making a game that is very cultural, at the same time you want to make it fun, how do you balance it where there's some elements that you bring in that aren't really from the culture, but you still want to retain the fun, bringing those things in. So, because on my team, narrative and gameplay tends to have, a bit of a struggle. This is fun, but doesn't align with the lore, the story, the culture. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one. It's probably one of the most important things that we as game developers should have in mind, because people play games for fun. They don't play them to learn stuff, right? So first and foremost, it has to be a good game. And a good game is engaging, it is fun, it brings people on. And then in the background, it can be educational. So a lot of times just what you just mentioned is that the cultural learning is not always in your face. It's more often than not is in the background, right? But it is told through authentic stories. And I believe, like, just as game developers and game designers, we got to be really smart about, is this game fun? Do people enjoy playing this? Because once they do, then they're more interested in the lore, they're more interested in the background. But first, people come to play games to be entertained, right? Do you have anything to add, Nabaz? Yeah, thank you. That's a great point that maybe you didn't mention of, but yes, it's really important to have fun games. Any other comments, please?
Yeah, hi. So first I want to say you stole all of my examples. Prince of Persia, which are definitely top two. But one no one has mentioned yet is Venba. I think it's like a cooking game that had a lot of praise when it first came out, like small studio, I believe. And it was like therapeutic. Like definitely for people of that culture, it was like great. You're going through a relationship with your parents and learning. But as someone from a different culture, I connected with it entirely. It's the same experience of learning to cook from your parents and maybe separating and moving and things like that. Secondly, I just want to applaud you and your team for putting in the effort as someone from a culture that is basically gone and erased. So I'm from Puerto Rico, and a lot of our natural and indigenous culture is basically gone. So seeing this and your presentation and you doing the art book and the game where newer generations can come in and learn and sort of see and experience that in their own way in VR is super, super cool. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you enjoyed this, and also we're very proud to have the opportunity to keep the conversation going, because we didn't start this and we're not going to end it, but it's important to keep it going. Yeah. Anything else? Please. Okay, we have 10 minutes left.
Thank you. I have a technical question. You showed before the this court sculpting of court buildings, the village buildings. Can you explain how did you like model it? Like, was it 3D scan or just is it like a real life buildings just recreated or?
Yeah. So for the building, usually digitally I sculpted them in ZBrush, and then after that we 3D printed them. So, but the 3D printing, because the scale was too big, so with the 3D printing, we tried to dissect it kind of like toys. And then we put them together as an installation for the physical world. But the base of it is from digital world and then 3D printed.
Yeah, but they are inspired by real. So this is an exaggerated version of that real thing. So because it's an art exhibition, so you want to see how can we make this a bit more abstract or a bit more direct. Like, so now instead of going in a slope, we made it just like a vertical tower with houses on top of each other.
Thank you. I have just one more small question. Do you have any idea if you in future will need to make like a representation of court culture in game? What kind of game will it be? Which story would you tell?
Yeah, Nabaz can tell you a bit more about it. This is something that we think about and we have in mind. It is horror. It's still horror because remember the creature that scared the hell out of me as a kid. Yeah. So we have a lot of that in our heritage. Like because a little bit of context. We are a mountain people. We lived solely on agriculture back in the day, and in the mountains and in the nature, there's a lot of beasts that can eat you alive. So the older generations, like parents and grandpas and grandmas, they would come up with these stories to scare the kids from going astray to places where they can be eaten by actual beasts. So they would come up with these scary creatures, right? So also, we have a lot of oral traditions that can really find their place in a horror setting. But Nabaz maybe can tell you a bit more about it.
Yeah, so right now the project we are working on is Operation Stutter. It's for global market and also so just so we can enter the market. The next project is Project Brown. That is the Kurdish story. And our history and our stories from folk are mostly very scary to some extent. And it's very related to Japanese style. Like most of the stories have no endings, or the mystery it never solves. So that gives more fear and a sense of awe or roaming around just to explore more. So I think these folk stories can be a perfect combination with horror games. And at the end of the day, it's still a video game. So the core of it has to be fun. So we can manipulate, we can exaggerate. It's entertainment. It's just to take people's attention. And then if someone is interested, just like I was interested in The Witcher, and then I went to Polish culture, someone can be interested in my culture and they dive into it and travel there and so on. And then some connections happen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other additions, please?
You asked for examples. I played a game called 1979, which is about the Black Friday Revolution in Iran. I had zero contact with the culture before that, and it was a great experience. I mean, I had no idea how it was. So I think these games are really amazing too. And recently at big festival in Brazil, Gamescom Latin America, Czech game I think won game for social impact, which was also about like the Czech Revolution. And it's nice to see like games portraying these moments of shifts in culture because they can be told by the people that were there. And I think this is so culturally rich what people are doing. And maybe they're not as fun as he mentioned, but they have that like social and historical impact, and this is so great to see.
Absolutely, and something else that usually we notice, and he just mentioned like correlation between ours and Japanese culture, right? We are in this different continents, but there's always very similar things that happen between across cultures, and these differences are really worth celebrating because they do bring us together, and because this also there's a counter argument that sometimes we've heard from like I've attended some conferences on culture where they said no, we should focus on more on the similarities and not the differences. So no, all cultures have the same background or have the same stories. Yeah, but that doesn't divide us. Having these differences are actually worthy of celebration. They're not something that we're not going to fight over them. You know, we're not that we're not primitive. We are conscious human beings where we can really appreciate each other for who we are, right? So we should maybe also get away from that idea of no, if we feel difference, then we are divided. We are united by our uniqueness. We really believe that, and we see ourselves in Polish culture, in Japan, in Latin America, and it's because we are all human at the end of the day, right? Despite our backgrounds, we still have the same instincts. We have the same stories. Yeah. Anything else? Please. We have 5 minutes, so maybe one or two more.
5 minutes. I'll be quick. I've been thinking while listening to everyone and your very good presentation that I'm realizing that we kind of have the opposite problem of where I'm from, Sweden. We're not necessarily underrepresented in media. In fact, I'd say one aspect of our culture and history is very represented. To the extent I would say it's overrepresented, which is, Vikings. And thinking back to when I talk to people from outside of Sweden and say, yeah, I'm from Sweden, and I'm like, oh yeah, Vikings, that's your culture. And I'm starting to realize that, yeah, maybe that part of our culture is starting to be overrepresented. So in such a way that our actual country or our different culture is being forgotten, because we have a lot of folk stories, other culture and history, that part of your presentation kind of stuck with me, that kids nowadays are starting to not know because it's kind of forgotten, and it's replaced by Vikings and like two gods, Loki and Thor. Yeah, and Odin. So yeah, there's that aspect. And so yeah, it's what I'm trying to highlight is you can have overrepresentation of one part of a culture, which leads to the other rest of the culture kind of being forgotten.
That's a very interesting point that we didn't think of it because we cannot relate. But yeah, but I do have a question for you. Like, do you think it's because of the stereotypical representation, or are there any specific titles that you would say, okay, this is about Vikings or like Viking era, but it's more focused on showcasing heritage or culture? Is there something like that, or do you feel like that about all the like Viking games and films and such?
If it's a very stereotypical representation, yeah, it's very, yeah, I would say it's very stereotypical and kind of boiled down to horned helmets, which we didn't even have, by the way. That would be very dumb. But yeah, I mean, maybe I would say the most accurate and non-stereotypical representations are probably the ones where the villains, when we invaded parts of the UK, stuff like that. But yeah, now that I think about it, I can't really come up with any non-stereotype, Viking brute representation.
That's a very, very interesting conversation, because yeah, there is also the other side of this. And from one misrepresentation of Vikings having horned helmets, now every time you think of a Viking, you think of a horned helmet, where historically they didn't even have those. So it just tells you that misrepresentation can have this ripple effect that for generations people remember something a certain way where reality is not like that. Any maybe last.
Hi there, I'm Manu. Thanks for the talk, by the way. Maybe I can add on to that, because we're here in Germany, and when you think about representation of Germans in video games especially, usually you're just thinking about Nazis. So, yeah, okay. But yeah, not really something new, but just adding on what you said.
Yeah, but let's change that. Let's start
do that.
changing that. Yeah. Yes, I don't think we have a lot more time. I really want to thank you guys so much for coming, for continuing this conversation, and I really hope that you will just talk about this more in your life with your friends, with your colleagues. And I would like to extend a thank you also to Kurdistan Center for Arts and Culture, which is supporting us all the way from Kurdistan to Germany, and also the Goethe Institute. It's a German institute that is also supporting us to be here. And yeah, we are very much interested in hearing what you guys have, in hearing suggestions or collaboration offers. You know, we are all interested in this. Let's talk about how we can change this, right? So that's our contact. We are also downstairs. Please come by, say hi, and let's not let this conversation die here. Do you have anything to add, Nabaz?
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.